June 13, 1944. Villers-Bocage, Normandy. The morning fog hangs low over the hedgerows, thick as cotton, muffling sound and distorting distance. A column of British Cromwell tanks advances along the narrow road, their tracks clattering against ancient cobblestones, their commanders peering into the gray-white wall of moisture that surrounds them. Behind them, a company of American M4 Sherman tanks moves in support, their crews tense, their fingers resting near triggers. The air smells of diesel fuel and wet earth and the smoke of distant artillery. Somewhere in that fog, unseen but present like a predator in tall grass, sits SS Obersturmführer Michael Whitman in his Tiger I heavy tank, 56 tons of Krupp steel and precision German engineering, mounting an 88mm gun capable of piercing any Allied armor at ranges exceeding 2,000 meters. Within minutes, Whitman will destroy 25 British vehicles in a single engagement that will become legend in German armored warfare. The Tigers will seem invincible. The Shermans will burn. And yet this moment, this apparent demonstration of German superiority, will mask a deeper truth that German commanders will not understand until it is too late. That wars are not won by the best tanks, but by enough tanks, and that the humble Sherman, mocked by its own crews as a Ronson lighter, derided by German tankers as a Tommy Cooker, will become the instrument that cripples the vaunted Panzer divisions and delivers armored supremacy to the Allied cause. The German tankers who climbed into their Tigers and Panthers in 1944 carried with them certain unshakable convictions about the nature of armored warfare. They believed in the supremacy of the individual weapon system, that a single superior tank, properly employed, could dominate a battlefield. They believed in the virtue of complexity, in armor thick enough to resist any projectile, in guns powerful enough to kill at distances where the enemy could not return fire. They believed that technological excellence would compensate for numerical disadvantage. These beliefs were not mere propaganda or wishful thinking. They were grounded in observable reality. The Tiger I, introduced in 1942, mounted frontal armor 100 millimeters thick, nearly twice that of the Sherman. Its 88mm KWK-36 gun could penetrate the Sherman's frontal armor at 1,800 meters, while the Sherman's 75mm gun could barely scratch the Tiger's armor at 500 meters. In direct combat, one-on-one, the Tiger was superior in almost every measurable category. German tank crews knew this. They felt it in the solid thunk of their armor deflecting enemy rounds, in the satisfying recoil of their guns sending shells through Allied tanks like paper. Victory reports from the Eastern Front documented Tigers destroying multiple T-34s without taking damage. Photographs showed burned-out Shermans with penetration holes punched clean through their turrets. The mathematics seemed inescapable. German engineering had produced the superior weapon. What German commanders failed to grasp, what their focus on individual technical superiority prevented them from seeing, was that the Americans had not set out to build the best tank. They had set out to build a system. The M4 Sherman, standardized in 1942, was designed around an entirely different philosophy of warfare, one that prioritized not the qualities of the individual weapon, but the aggregate capabilities of industrial production, logistical support, and operational sustainability. The Sherman was not designed to win single combat against a Tiger. It was designed to be manufactured in quantities that would overwhelm any opponent, to be maintained by crews with minimal technical training, to be transported across oceans and supplied across continents, to be repaired in field conditions, and returned to combat within hours. Where a Tiger required 5,000 man-hours to manufacture, a Sherman required 10,000 man-hours, but America was producing them in 11 factories simultaneously. Where German armor required specialized spare parts shipped from factories in Germany, often through disrupted supply lines, the Sherman was designed with interchangeable components that could be cannibalized from damaged vehicles or airdropped in standardized containers. Where German tankers required months of training on their complex transmission systems and temperamental engines, American crews could be taught to operate a Sherman in weeks. The Tiger tank, magnificent in its engineering, carried within it the seeds of its own strategic irrelevance. Each Tiger consumed as much fuel as 3 Shermans. Its complex overlapping roadwheel design, intended to distribute weight and provide superior ride quality, trapped mud and debris in winter conditions, freezing solid overnight and immobilizing the vehicle until crews could chip away ice with hammers and blowtorches. Its Maybach HL-230 engine, powerful but temperamental, required constant maintenance and frequently broke down under sustained operation. German quartermasters calculated that, for every 10 Tigers sent to the front, only 3 would be combat-ready at any given time, the others down for maintenance, awaiting parts, or suffering from the mechanical breakdowns that plagued over-engineered systems operated beyond their design limits. The Tiger's 88 gun, superb in its lethality, consumed ammunition at rates that German logistics could barely sustain. A single Tiger carried 92 rounds. A sustained engagement might expend 40 or 50 rounds. Resupply required trucks that consumed fuel, traveling roads that Allied aircraft hunted, carrying shells manufactured in factories that Allied bombers targeted. The Sherman, by contrast, was engineered for a different kind of war. Its welded hull construction allowed for rapid production using techniques borrowed from shipbuilding. Its Continental R975 radial engine, a modified aircraft engine, was reliable to the point of being boring, capable of running for hundreds of hours between major maintenance. Its vertical volute spring suspension system was simple enough that a crew could replace a road wheel in 30 minutes using nothing but hand tools. Its 75 mm3 gun, while inferior to the 88 mm penetration, fired high-explosive shells that were devastating against infantry and lighter vehicles, and American factories were producing ammunition at rates that seemed impossible to German observers. A single armored division could fire more shells in a week than the entire German panzer force could fire in a month. Logistics officers calculated that, for every Sherman lost in combat, another could be delivered to the front within 72 hours. The tank itself became a symbol of something deeper: American industrial abundance translated into military capability. The German tankers who first encountered Shermans in North Africa in 1942 had laughed at them. They called them Shermans, sardine cans, and death traps. They composed songs mocking the American tanks that brewed up so easily when penetrated, their gasoline engines igniting in fireballs that could be seen for kilometers. German veterans of the Eastern Front, accustomed to the brutal slugging matches with Soviet T-34s, found the Sherman almost pitiable, thin-skinned, undergunned, vulnerable. In the rolling desert warfare of Tunisia, where open ground allowed German tanks to engage at maximum range, Tigers and Panthers massacred Sherman units, destroying 5 and 6 American tanks for every German loss. Reports flowed back to Berlin confirming German technological supremacy. Propaganda films showed Tigers shrugging off Sherman fire, their crews grinning for cameras. The mockery seemed justified. The Americans had brought quantity, but Germany had brought quality, and quality was winning. But the desert was not Europe, and individual engagements were not campaigns. As the war moved into Italy in 1943 and France in 1944, the operational realities that favored German technical superiority began to erode. The Bocage country of Normandy, with its dense hedgerows and narrow lanes, its villages and stone walls, its limited sight lines and opportunities for ambush, negated much of the Tiger's advantage in range and armor. Shermans could not engage Tigers at 2,000 meters because they could not see 2,000 meters. Combat occurred at distances measured in dozens of meters, not hundreds, And at those ranges, doctrine and numbers mattered more than gun penetration. American armored doctrine, developed through hard experience in North Africa and Italy, emphasized combined arms coordination. Shermans did not hunt tigers alone. They advanced with infantry to clear positions, with artillery to suppress enemy tanks, with tank destroyers mounting higher-velocity guns specifically designed to kill German armor, with aircraft to strike targets beyond the reach of ground forces. A Tiger might destroy 3 Shermans in an engagement, but the 4th Sherman would flank it while infantry called artillery, and tank destroyers moved into position, and fighter-bombers circled overhead waiting for the Tiger to reveal its position. The Battle of Aracourt in September 1944 demonstrated what American combined arms doctrine could accomplish against supposedly superior German armor. The 4th Armored Division, equipped entirely with Shermans, engaged the German 5th Panzer Army, which included multiple battalions of Panthers, Germany's second-generation main battle tank, nearly as formidable as the Tiger. On paper, the Panthers enjoyed overwhelming technical superiority. In practice, American coordination destroyed them. Shermans used superior mobility to force Panthers into disadvantageous positions. Artillery hammered German formations, forcing them to move and exposing their thinner side armor. Tank destroyers with 76 mm guns killed Panthers at ranges where the Shermans could not. Fighter bombers struck German supply columns, leaving Panthers immobilized for lack of fuel. Over 2 weeks of combat, the 4th Armored Division destroyed or disabled over 200 German tanks while losing fewer than 30 Shermans. The Germans enjoyed technical superiority in every individual engagement. The Americans enjoyed systematic superiority across the entire battlefield. The Panthers were superior tanks. The Shermans won the battle. German commanders struggled to comprehend what was happening. Their training and doctrine emphasized the decisive engagement, the clash of armor against armor in which superior weapons would prevail. They understood individual combat. They did not understand that the Americans had reframed armored warfare around sustainability rather than superiority. A destroyed Sherman was a temporary inconvenience. A destroyed Tiger was an irreplaceable loss. By late 1944, Germany was producing fewer than 100 Tigers per month from factories increasingly disrupted by Allied bombing. America was producing more than 1,000 Shermans per month from factories running at less than full capacity. The Tiger required specialized transportation by rail because its width exceeded standard road limits. The Sherman could drive itself to the front on its own tracks. The Tiger required a dedicated supply train of fuel trucks and ammunition carriers. The Sherman could operate for days on supplies carried in a single truck. The mathematics of attrition favored not the better tank but the available tank, and Shermans were always available. The symbolic power of this disparity manifested itself in small details that German soldiers began to notice. As 1944 turned to 1945, American tank crews received new tanks so quickly that veterans complained about breaking and replacement vehicles, a problem that would have seemed luxurious to German tankers nursing the same Tiger for months. American mechanics had so many spare parts that they sometimes replaced entire engines rather than repairing them, a practice that shocked German prisoners, who had spent weeks jury-rigging repairs to keep tanks operational. American armored divisions received airdrop supplies of ammunition and fuel with such regularity that crews fired high-explosive shells at suspected enemy positions, rather than conserving ammunition, a level of abundance that seemed impossible to soldiers from a nation where artillery batteries rationed shells and tank crews counted rounds. The spare road wheel, that humble symbol of American industrial capacity, became the visual marker of the Sherman's true advantage. Every Sherman carried a spare road wheel bolted to its hull, not because breakdowns were expected, but because they were anticipated and planned for. German tanks carried no spares. They could not afford the weight or the production capacity. A thrown track or broken road wheel on a Tiger often meant abandonment. A thrown track on a Sherman meant 30 minutes of repair. The transformation in German perception occurred gradually, then suddenly. The mockery that had characterized early encounters with Shermans gave way to grudging respect, then to something approaching despair. German tankers who had laughed at American armor in Tunisia were writing letters home in 1944, describing their helplessness against endless waves of Shermans. Veterans of the Eastern Front, accustomed to Soviet human wave tactics, now faced a new kind of attrition, not of men but of machines, an industrial grinding that wore down German armor through sheer persistence. A Tiger commander might destroy 5 Shermans in an engagement and still lose the battle because 10 more Shermans would arrive the next day while his Tiger sat immobilized, waiting for parts that would never come. The psychological weight of this imbalance pressed down on German crews with increasing force. They had the superior weapons. They were losing the war. The cognitive dissonance became unbearable. The Battle of the Bulge in December 1944 represented Germany's last major armored offensive in the West, a desperate gamble to split the Allied armies and force a negotiated peace. German planners assembled the strongest panzer force they could muster, 5 panzer divisions and 3 panzer grenadier divisions, equipped with more than 400 tanks including dozens of Tigers and Panthers. The offensive achieved initial surprise, smashing through American lines and creating a bulge in the Allied front that gave the battle its name. German propaganda trumpeted the success. For a brief moment, it seemed that German armor might yet achieve decisive victory. Then American logistics awoke. Within 72 hours, entire armored divisions were racing toward the bulge from positions hundreds of kilometers away, a level of operational mobility that German planners had not believed possible. Shermans that had been engaged in offensive operations in the north disengaged, drove through the night, refueled on the move, and entered combat in the south before German commanders realized they were coming. American supply trucks, organized in massive convoys called Red Ball Express routes, delivered thousands of tons of ammunition, fuel, and supplies despite terrible weather and disrupted roads. Fighter bombers, grounded initially by fog, emerged when the weather cleared and massacred German supply columns. The decisive engagement at Bastogne illustrated the Sherman's true advantage with brutal clarity. German panzer units surrounded the town and demanded surrender. American defenders, including the 10th Armored Division with its Sherman tanks, refused. German commanders assumed that surrounded American forces, cut off from resupply, would exhaust their ammunition and fuel within days. They assumed wrong. American transport aircraft dropped supplies by parachute, including fuel and ammunition for the Shermans. American tank destroyers, dug in among the buildings, turned Bastogne into a killing ground where German armor bled itself white trying to force passage. When Patton's Third Army counterattacked to relieve Bastogne, it advanced with Sherman-equipped armored divisions that had driven more than 100 miles through winter conditions in under 48 hours. A feat of sustained mobility that exhausted German tanks would have been physically incapable of matching. The Germans had superior individual weapons. The Americans had a superior system. The system won. By January 1945, as German forces retreated from the Bulge, the character of armored warfare had fundamentally changed. German panzer divisions, once the spearhead of blitzkrieg, had become shells of their former strength. Tigers and Panthers sat immobilized along roadsides, abandoned for lack of fuel or parts, their crews destroying them to prevent capture. German tankers increasingly fought not in offensive operations, but in desperate defensive actions, trying to delay the inevitable Allied advance. The Sherman, meanwhile, had evolved. The M4 A3 E8 Easy 8 variant, mounting a higher velocity 76 gun and improved suspension, entered service in late 1944 and gave American crews the ability to penetrate German heavy armor from the front at combat ranges. The Sherman Firefly, mounting the British 17-pounder gun, could kill any German tank it encountered. But these improvements, significant as they were, almost missed the point. The Sherman's advantage had never been its gun or its armor. Its advantage had been its availability, its presence in numbers that made individual superiority irrelevant. The statistical evidence, compiled after the war, told a story that propaganda on both sides had obscured during the fighting. Germany produced approximately 1,350 Tiger I tanks during the entire war. America produced approximately 49,000 Shermans. Germany's most advanced tank, the Tiger II or King Tiger, with its 150 frontal armor and powerful 8mm-71 gun, entered service in 1944 as perhaps the most formidable heavy tank of the war, and Germany produced fewer than 500 of them. By contrast, by the time the King Tiger entered service, there were more than 20,000 Shermans operating in Europe. The Soviet Union, fighting its own war with different equipment, produced more than 35,000 T-34 tanks. The Axis fought the Allied powers not tank versus tank, but hundreds of tanks versus tens of thousands of tanks. Technical superiority became strategically meaningless in the face of such quantitative disparity. A Tiger might kill 10 enemy tanks before being destroyed, and there would still be 100 enemy tanks remaining. The mathematics of attrition made German victory impossible no matter how superior individual German weapons became. The strategic implications extended beyond simple numbers. The Sherman standardization meant that crews could transfer between vehicles with minimal adjustment. Replacements arrived at the front already trained on the same equipment they would use in combat. Mechanics did not need to learn different repair procedures for different models. Supply officers did not need to stock dozens of specialized parts for dozens of different vehicles. The entire logistical and training infrastructure simplified around a single platform, producing efficiencies that multiplied American advantages. German armored forces, by contrast, operated a bewildering variety of tanks and self-propelled guns: Panthers, Tigers, Panzer IVs, Sturmgeschütz assault guns, Jagdpanzer tank destroyers, each with different engines, different transmissions, different guns requiring different ammunition. German mechanics needed training on multiple platforms. German supply officers needed to track parts for vehicles that were often unique to specific units. The complexity that German engineers had built into individual weapons infected the entire system, transforming technical excellence into logistical nightmare. The human cost of this disparity manifested itself in ways that statistics could not capture. German tankers in 1944 and 1945 fought with increasing desperation, knowing that every destroyed tank was irreplaceable. Every dead crewman could not be adequately replaced. Elite panzer units that had once spearheaded offensives found themselves parceled out to infantry divisions in penny packets, their Tigers and Panthers used as mobile pillboxes rather than maneuver elements. The vaunted panzer divisions that had conquered France in 1940 and driven to the gates of Moscow in 1940, one became shadows of themselves, their designations maintained long after their effective combat power had evaporated. American tankers, meanwhile, fought with the confidence that came from abundance. A destroyed Sherman was mourned, its crew potentially killed or wounded, its loss tactically significant, but strategically expected and already compensated for. The spare road wheel welded to every Sherman's hull became a talisman of this abundance, a visible reminder that American forces had planned for loss and built resilience into their systems. The symbolic power of the Sherman crystallized in the stories that soldiers told each other, stories that circulated through armies and became part of the war's mythology. German veterans spoke of encountering American tank columns that stretched for kilometers, Shermans rolling forward in numbers that seemed inexhaustible. They described the sound of Sherman engines, that distinctive radial engine whine, becoming synonymous with defeat, not because a single Sherman was fearsome, but because there were always more Shermans. American veterans told their own stories of receiving a replacement tank within hours of losing one, of repair crews that could resurrect damaged Shermans overnight, of supply convoys that never failed to arrive. These stories, transmitted through letters and conversations and post-war memoirs, built a narrative in which the Sherman became something more than a tank. It became a symbol of American industrial power, of a nation that could produce war materiel in quantities that overwhelmed any opponent, of a democracy that mobilized its economy for total war, and sustained that mobilization across years of global conflict. The deeper truth that emerged from the Sherman success had implications that extended beyond armored warfare into the fundamental nature of industrialized conflict. The Germans had approached tank design as craftsmen, building individual masterpieces of engineering that reflected their technical skill and mechanical sophistication. The Americans had approached tank design as factory managers, building standardized products that reflected their industrial capacity and logistical capabilities. German engineering produced superior individual weapons. American engineering produced a superior system of war-making. The war demonstrated with brutal finality that systems defeated weapons, that sustainability defeated sophistication, that the ability to replace losses mattered more than the ability to avoid them. The Tiger tank, magnificent in isolation, became strategically irrelevant because it could not be produced, maintained, and supplied in quantities sufficient to affect outcomes. The Sherman tank, mediocre in individual combat, became strategically decisive because it could be produced in quantities that made individual combat outcomes irrelevant. This revelation transformed military thinking in ways that would echo through subsequent decades. The Soviet Union, observing American success with the Sherman, doubled down on its own philosophy of mass production, creating tank designs like the T-54 that prioritized simplicity and manufacturability over individual performance. NATO forces in the Cold War struggled to balance the American lesson of quantity with the desire for technological superiority, eventually settling on smaller numbers of more capable tanks backed by robust logistics. The debate between quality and quantity, between the Tiger philosophy and the Sherman philosophy, became central to military planning in the atomic age. But the lesson of World War II remained clear. In sustained conflict between industrialized nations, the side that could sustain production and maintain supply would ultimately prevail, regardless of individual weapon superiority. The German tankers who survived the war carried with them memories that complicated the propaganda they had been taught. They remembered the superiority of their Tigers and Panthers, the satisfying crack of their 88 guns destroying enemy tanks. They also remembered the helplessness of watching endless columns of Shermans advancing despite their best efforts, the despair of knowing that every German tank they saw might be the last, the bitter recognition that individual skill and superior weapons could not compensate for systemic disadvantage. In prisoner-of-war camps and post-war interviews, German veterans spoke with something approaching awe about American logistics, about the abundance of supplies, the speed of replacement, the casual waste of ammunition that Americans could afford and Germans could not imagine. They had mocked the Sherman, then they had fought it, then they had lost to it. The mockery had been replaced by understanding, too late to matter but profound in its implications. The final accounting, compiled from archives and unit records and after-action reports, revealed the extent of the disparity. American Sherman-equipped armored divisions participated in virtually every major campaign in Western Europe from D-Day to VE Day. German Tiger units, by contrast, spent much of the war in reserve or committed to desperate defensive actions, their numbers too small to affect strategic outcomes. The total number of Sherman tanks destroyed in combat in Europe exceeded 6,000, a number that seemed to validate German mockery and prove Tiger superiority. But those 6,000 destroyed Shermans represented less than 15% of American Sherman production, and the vast majority were replaced within days. The total number of Tigers destroyed exceeded 900, nearly 70% of total production, and none could be replaced. The Americans lost more tanks and won the war. The Germans destroyed more enemy tanks per friendly loss and lost the war. The mathematics, brutal in its simplicity, demonstrated that victory belonged not to those with the best weapons, but to those with enough weapons, sustained by systems robust enough to maintain them. May 8, 1945. The war in Europe ends. Across the continent, in fields and forests and city streets, thousands of Sherman tanks sit idle, their engines silent, their guns cold. Many show the scars of combat, patchwork welding where armor has been repaired, replaced road wheels of different colors, dents and scrapes and carbon scoring from near misses and glancing hits. Nearby, scattered across the same landscape, stand the abandoned hulks of German heavy tanks, Tigers and Panthers and King Tigers, their magnificent guns silent forever, their massive hulls immobilized by mechanical failure or lack of fuel or simple abandonment. Some have been destroyed in combat, their armor finally penetrated by shaped charges or aerial bombs or massed artillery. Others sit intact, preserved as monuments to engineering excellence that could not overcome logistical impossibility. The contrast between these machines, the scarred but functional Shermans, the magnificent but immobile Tigers, tells the story of the war in miniature. The spare road wheel, that humble symbol of American abundance, appears in thousands of photographs from the war's end, bolted to Sherman hulls, a circular promise that whatever breaks can be fixed, whatever is lost can be replaced. It was never the most powerful gun or the thickest armor that won armored supremacy in Europe. It was the presence of that spare wheel, multiplied across thousands of tanks, representing not individual superiority but systematic resilience. The Germans had built beautiful, deadly, sophisticated weapons that consumed resources faster than their economy could provide. The Americans had built simple, adequate, sustainable weapons that their economy could produce faster than the enemy could destroy. In that difference lay the entire strategic logic of industrialized warfare, and the reason why the mocked Sherman crippled the vaunted Tiger divisions. The lesson, written in the burned hulks of panzer divisions and the victorious advance of Sherman-equipped armored corps, resonated beyond its immediate military context. It spoke to a larger truth about democracies at war, that their strength lay not in individual excellence but in collective capacity, not in the brilliance of single weapons, but in the depth of their industrial base and the resilience of their systems. The Sherman was never meant to be the best tank. It was meant to be enough tanks, and in that sufficiency lay a power